Thank you very much for giving me opportunity to tell about you and yourself to my audience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking me. I feel honored.
So I came to know that you are into sociology and work and employment, and you're from Sweden, and you're a lecturer, researcher in a
Yeah,
university and in a non-governmental organization.
yes, exactly. That's right.
So before talking more about you, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my name is Linda Weidenstedt, and I'm actually, I was born in Germany, but I'm half Swedish and I live in Sweden. Um, yeah, I've always been an academic. I have a bachelor degree in English language and literature and intercultural communication, and a master's degree in European studies. And after that, I continued with, yeah, a PhD in sociology with focus on working life and labor market questions and, yeah, management leadership things. And I'm doing research at a private research institute that's called the Ratio Institute, that's located in Stockholm. And that institute does particularly do research on labor market phenomena and yeah, work, everything that's work related and business related and entrepreneur related and things like that. And I also teach at Stockholm University in sociology. And yeah, that's my life.
Wonderful. So, what actually made you to come into English literature? And your master's degree is completely different from what your bachelor's is, and your
Yeah,
bachelor and your PhD research studies is different from your master's. So, why this variation?
yeah. Yeah, so I just loved English in school, and that was like the obvious choice back at the time for me to continue with language and literature. I've always loved language and communication. That's really communication, interaction, and relations. That's really what I'm about, and that gets my adrenaline going and my juices flowing, and that's what I'm really passionate about. And so yeah, I just decided to do that. And I think the most interesting part of those bachelor studies was the intercultural communication part, learning what kind of communicative problems can come up between different cultures, and yeah, particularly also in the business world. And so I was just really into that at that time, and it's still a big part of me. And because of that intercultural aspect, the European studies and the masters, that was kind of the bridge or the link between the two, that were interesting for me. And that master program was interdisciplinary, so it was both European law and European politics, religion, language, and we had one more that I forgot. And so it was all of these things combined that I was really into. And from that, again, I think it was both the communication part, but also understanding that all of these things are linked and intertwined. And I was looking for a field that would allow me to do a PhD without having, I didn't obviously just study English language or English literature, and so I couldn't do a PhD in that area because I wouldn't be allowed into the programs. But sociology really, I hadn't understood that I had done sociology all along, basically, just not knowing it. And so sociology allowed me to bundle all of my interests and to kind of understand on a more deeper level how these different aspects intertwine and are connected with each other. And so that's how I got into sociology, and that I ended up doing sociology related to work was actually that was a long process. I started out with completely different topics in my PhD, so I think I switched my PhD topic 3 or 4 times. So my first year was really, really messy. And then I landed in this idea of communication at the workplace. And so for me, the red thread going through all of these studies is really the communication part, the relations, the interaction. That's what's really interesting for me. It's just that on paper, the programs look extremely different.
So your PhD studies is about work and employment. So have you understood the work and the employment in Sweden?
Oh, totally. I have understood it all. No, I'm kidding. Um, yeah, I mean, so my thesis was about a very particular management technique that is called empowerment. And that management technique kind of developed from this developing idea that employees should have more and more right to kind of have power at the workplace. So from the idea that employees just stand at an assembly line and don't really have anything to say in the company, we have today arrived at models of leadership that include the employee in decision-making processes and ask employees what they need to kind of feel good at the workplace. And empowerment is one of these methods to achieve that. And so in my thesis, I really looked very closely at that particular management technique. But in my further research after my PhD, I defended my thesis in 2017, so it's been a while actually. And in my research after that, I have focused much more on bigger issues, on labor market issues, such as, for example, employment protection, also on informal contracts, which is a complement to formal employment contracts. We're talking here about things that we agree on in verbal conversation or things that we assume about each other as employer and employee. So these are informal contracts that we make. And now recently I have started doing research on the gig economy and platform economy. So I've kind of been very broad, and in all of that, I think I have understood the Swedish labor market a bit better and what's going on in Sweden. So I think I would say I know a great deal about work in Sweden, but of course, obviously not everything.
So it is very important for you to understand everything which is related to work and employment uh, uh, when it comes to the sociology, the complete 360 degrees. So have you understood the political things related to this?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's an interesting question because you somehow I think as long as you focus very specifically on tiny aspects of, for example, leadership techniques, as I did in my thesis, that doesn't really come in the political side. But once I started at the Ratio Institute and there the labor market research is much more, it's broader, then you have to integrate the political side as well because it has such a big role. And so I still feel pretty new at that. I mean, I've done it for like I think almost 4 years now, so it's not that new. But I mean, I'm not a political scientist, so I feel like I try to understand the things that I need to understand, um, because otherwise you don't get the whole picture, you know. Um, so yeah, I think I kind of, it's part of my job.
So have you understood all the industries in your society?
No, definitely not. I think in terms of industries, I have, or well, sectors or branches. The only one that I really have dived into a little bit is the platform and gig economy. So I'm definitely not an expert on all different branches or sectors or industries. Um, because except for the platform and gig economy, I haven't really done research particularly on any industry. It has always been either very much smaller or very much broader. Um, so yeah.
So how many years you went back and how many years you're thinking forward when it comes to work and employment in Sweden?
In my research, mm, um, well, that's a really interesting question. Um, so in terms of thinking back, um, um, The Swedish labor market model is a bit special because it works through very little political influence. So in Sweden, I think it was in the 60s and 70s, there was an act, a political act that decided that the labor market parties should interact with each other. And so employer organizations, excuse me, employer organizations and employee organizations, so unions, work with each other. They try to solve all the problems, they discuss all the issues without political influence. And because of that agreement and because of that interaction between the unions and the employer organizations, you kind of you have to go back a little bit and look at the history that has happened to understand what's happening today. I mean, of course, that's the case even if it's a very politically driven labor market, but things were done back in the days that maybe need to be revised. We have old legislation on things, we have old relationships, and at the same time, these relationships are really renewed quite regularly because we have the system of employer organizations and unions interacting, and people responsible for different posts change. And so ideas change and times change. So it's in a way a bit more a flexible model because we don't need for political decisions to get going because that can take time. But it's also a model where certain things have been so institutionalized that it's sometimes difficult to change things. And so you have to go back a little bit at least to understand all of that if you want to understand Swedish work. But otherwise, my research is definitely focused on the future. And I have never thought about how many years ahead into the future I think. But right now, with the platform economy developing, I mean, it's also very hard to see what's going to happen. But I'm really interested in looking at what are these transformations doing with our working lives and with employees, and what could we possibly think will happen in the future. But the future is happening really quickly at the moment. I mean, the technical development is going faster and faster, and so it's a bit hard to keep up. You're doing research on one thing and the next day it's already outdated, you know. Research takes so much time as well, so that's complicated.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time, and you're doing this, and you love it. So, you study in the process of your studies about sociology and work and employment. Do you study only about the Sweden country or other countries too, in order to compare other countries, what they have, what they don't have, what are the things that making them to have more jobs, more work there, how this work is created, how this wealth is being created, how the leadership is. Do you compare in the process of your studies and try what is your intention, what you want to tell to your through your doctorate studies?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so far I haven't really done any particular comparative research. I have, I mean, in my PhD thesis, it was really about Sweden because, you know, oftentimes you do research on your own context just because it's also easier in terms of access. The other research I've done is focused on Sweden as well. Not without a comparative perspective, because you always try to look at what have other countries done, what has other research about other countries done, and how does Sweden differ from that. But I haven't done research on other countries. So it's always Sweden, but of course in relation to the world or to other countries. Now with the platform economy, obviously that all of that gets a bit more global. But so far we have a few studies going on that actually are on a global perspective, where we have survey material from several countries. kind of getting into that comparative notion a little bit, but so far it has mostly been on Sweden. And in terms of what I want to, so to speak, achieve with my research or communicate, it's really about how can the future working life, first of all, how will it look like? And second of all, what does it change in comparison to now? And that, of course, applies to all kinds of labor markets where platforms, for example, exist. But of course, I'm still focused on the Swedish context, so particularly focused on how can we integrate the platform economy into the Swedish labor market model? What does the platform economy do to employees? How do the platforms think about the labor market, about scaling their businesses? And of course, all of that is, if they have their operation in Sweden, then they need to take that into context when thinking about scaling. We do have certain rules and regulations on the Swedish labor market, which these platforms need to relate to. They need to somehow negotiate how their future will look like here. So right now I think we're in big transitions probably, where we have to kind of deal with the fact that old institutions are being challenged, and we need to find new ways of creating new institutions for both employees, employers, organizations, but also the workers. And so it's really for me about figuring out where are the problems, what kind of problems do we have to address, how can we address them to make everyone a little bit happy. And to get to that point, we need to talk to people. So we need to talk to people that work as gig workers or platform workers. We need to talk to the platforms as well and hear their perspective to see why are people working like that? What do they like about it? Do they want to do that their whole lives? What are the problems with this kind of working? What are the advantages? And also for the platforms, how can they run a successful business without at the same time being hugely unethical? How can they fit into our existing political structures, into the judicial structures that we have? So it's really a kind of a figuring out how to do this that I think I kind of try to do with my research.
So, as a person who did masters in software engineering and bachelor's in computer science and engineering, my area is IT. So, tell me about IT industry and the work and employment in Sweden. How it is creating impact. Yeah, IT industry. How it is creating impact on society and how it is affecting, how it is creating wealth in Sweden.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, that's okay. Spontaneously, I think that's a very economic question, but of course, it's a sociological question as well. I don't know a whole lot about the IT sector as such, but of course, I have a little bit of an idea because of the platforms. Generally, I think that Sweden obviously is a country where a lot of tech and IT ideas come from and are born, and there's a lot of activity here. I think, I don't know what's the hen and what's the egg. I don't know if people in Sweden are very interested in technology because of all of these inventions that come from here, or if the inventions come from Sweden because people are like that here. I think Swedes are very open to innovation and change, and they are very uncomplicated in a sense. So in Germany, I think people are more like, we have a new idea, then we first have to test all the consequences, what could happen, and we need to follow the rules and regulations. And that's a bit easier here in Sweden. You just have more of this idea, trial and error. Let's just try it and see what happens. So it's much more of an entrepreneurial spirit and a more of an innovative spirit. And I think that's one of the reasons why we maybe are, I don't know, more inventive or creative or futuristic in our thinking. Sweden was very early on computerized. and like, for example, medical journals. There were like networks for that, so that you could access medical journals from all different kinds of places in Sweden. That took ages in Germany, for example. And so, yeah, so in that sense, of course, the IT businesses have an influence on Sweden in terms of how people live their lives and what kind of applications they use. Sweden is extremely digital in all kinds of respects. We almost don't use cash anymore. So there are a lot of shops in Sweden that don't take cash, so you can only pay by either by card or by apps. There are several different apps that you can use to pay. So you just use your phone to make payments in clothing stores or in the supermarkets. And yeah, I know that a lot of people in other countries find that really weird, but I never have cash. I just, if I get cash like from my grandma, I don't know what to do with it. It's like, where do I even put it? Where do I to which shop should I go and buy something, because many shops don't take cash anymore. And so yeah, these things, Swedes are very open also with their private information, so to speak, because I mean, the thing is that as soon as all of that is transferred into the digital world, there are always traces, right? And so the bank can see exactly where you buy stuff, where you shop. And Swedes don't really have an issue with that. So there's a lot of transparency in your personal affairs. And I mean, not everyone is interested in that, but if there would be interest, then that data would be there. And so because Swedes are not very, there's a high trust for the state in Sweden and for state agencies. And because of that, yeah, Swedes are very trusting. And because of that, I think that also makes this innovation possible, because we don't have any of these ethical ideas that wouldn't be okay, for example. So, but in terms of, for example, the more economic side of how much of the BNP is IT related stuff, that I'm not really into that, so I don't really know about that. It's really about the more effects on society, and I think those effects are quite great. So if you come to Sweden, then a lot of things are very, very digital and very, which also means that my parents recently moved from Germany to Sweden, so they live here now. And my mother is a Swedish national. And despite the fact that she is a Swedish national, she has to wait for a very long time at the moment to get into the system. For some reasons, there are bureaucratic problems. And without being in the system and have it's called a person number. So each person has a specific number in Sweden, a social security number. And without that, you basically can't do anything. And you cannot download even the apps that you need to do all the online payment, for example. And so if you're in the system, then a lot of things are extremely digital. But if you're not in the system, then you're also quite excluded. And I think that makes Sweden quite unique, quite special. It's a very easy way of living here. You can do everything with your phone. You can just swish and tap, and you sign a lot of things with your phone. So there's a certain app that you use, and if you need to sign special papers for bureaucratic agencies, or if you have to kind of show what is it, like, instead of having an ID card, a passport or an ID card, you have this app that identifies you, and things like that. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool. It's pretty high level IT stuff.
So is it possible for each and every individual in every house to have a job once they complete their education?
That's a very good question. No. We do have unemployed people. We do have unemployed youth in Sweden. I'm not exactly sure about the numbers at the moment, because one of the problems is that, or I mean, it's always a question, what are we talking about? So are we talking about the population in Sweden that is doing a Swedish education, that goes through the Swedish school system and does Swedish education, then I think generally you have quite good chances to get at least some kind of job in Sweden. But we do have a large number of migrants in the country, and of those, a large majority is unemployed, and particularly women. And so for certain groups, it's obviously more difficult to enter the labor market than for other groups. And I mean, yeah, I don't know exactly the numbers to make differences between, for example, migrants and people that have gone through the Swedish educational system. But of course, we do have problems with unemployment as well. And it depends a lot on what you're educating yourself as. So if you become a teacher, for example, we have a huge lack of teachers in the IT industry. We need people all the time. So it's in healthcare, it's such a huge lack of personnel. So of course, it depends a little bit on what you want to do. And there's always this problem that if you, let's just be like really cliche, but if you want to become an influencer, then it might be harder to get ahead than if you actually, I don't know, learn a certain craft, or if you have a certain education that is needed on the labor market today.
So you study sociology, you study what is happening in the society, you understand how the wealth is being created, you understand how people are making things possible in order to generate energy in the society. So what are the key things, key factors that you understood? This is what works in order to make a lot of people to have jobs and have work and have good positive lives. Do you understood any particular point that 100% works?
Yeah, I mean, those are extremely macro. Those are really big questions, and I think that I probably don't have all the answers. I just have a certain. You look like you know that you posed a really difficult question. Yeah, so I don't have all the answers. What I have understood for myself is that for a country to prosper, you need to have innovation, you need to have entrepreneurship, you need to have jobs, right? Because we all need to earn money. And so there need to be job opportunities for us. And that means that we need to create businesses, and we need to have employers, and a lot of them. And of course, we need to be these employers. We need them to be good employers as well, so that we actually have a good life and feel good with ourselves, ideally while being at work and not just working to get the money. And so this idea of the good working life is of course really important to create a prospering society, a society that where we have equality as well. I mean, as long as we have people that don't get jobs and that can't earn money and that live on a very, very little income from state agencies or whatever it can be, from social services, then as long as we have this inequality, then we always have problems in society. And of course, it's very utopian to think that we could ever reach a state where there's total equality. But I think that I have understood more than before through my studies how important jobs really are. It's not just to create value. It's just really for us as a society, for us human beings, it's necessary to even get a chance to come to some kind of equality and a good life. And I think that, I mean, one of the aspects, and if we talk more about personal thriving and well-being, then of course we do not only have the question of I have a job and I need to be thankful for that because I earn money and that's how I support my life or my family. Of course, that's a very pragmatic view, and some people are perfectly happy with that. But we also go from from previous times where we had just a few professions. There was a shoemaker, and there was, I don't know, people who, I don't know, were horse carriage riders, or I don't know what you call them. So you had very few professions, and you were born into professions almost. You just took over whatever your dad was doing. That was what the boy in the family learned how to do, and that was what kind of, there were no more opportunities. But nowadays we have such a wealth of opportunities. You could become basically anything. There are so many jobs. We have created so many occupations, and with that, with greater choice comes also greater unhappiness sometimes, because now you have to think about what is it that you want to do, what is it that makes you happy, and what, yeah. And so I think that many people today are striving for some kind of self-fulfillment, much more than in previous times. And I don't say that previous times were better always. It's just that we have created a few problems for ourselves as well. And so what is important today is also considering how can we make people feel good about their jobs, how can we create workplaces that take human needs into consideration. And that's very complicated. That's a difficult thing to do, because we're also very different. And there's not a company that can have a leadership style that fits to every one of their employees. That's just not possible. So you have to be open to kind of adapt all the time, to be flexible in what you do and how you do it. And with every new employee, there's a new situation coming into the company. With every outside change of situations of any kind, of frameworks, of regulations, things change in the company. So I think we need to be more and more flexible. And I think we get better at that. Generally, humanity gets better at adapting quickly. We've always been good at that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have survived. But I think that that has increasingly become, a thing that is important to have a good life, I guess. I mean, like, to take that as an example, before you maybe were a shoemaker all your life, and nowadays you cannot count on the fact that you educate yourself in one area and that you will work within that area all your life. You just cannot assume that to be true. So you might start out with one kind of job and you might be trained for that, but you will have to be flexible and learn other skills and acquire other competencies to stay in the game. You cannot just do your job all the time during your whole lifespan. That's become quite impossible for a lot of people, and that's not easy for everyone. Not everyone wants that, and so there are a lot of challenges at the moment. I mean, there are always challenges. It's not like we live in such a special time, but yeah, we have to deal with the challenges that we have today.
Who is your favorite entrepreneur, and why? Because you spend a lot of time in understanding the work and employment, and understand sociology. Uh, it is not easy for you to select a particular entrepreneur uh, to to make your favorite.
Oh, that's a very difficult question. No, I think I cannot answer that, actually. I mean, partly because from what perspective, I think that any entrepreneur, I mean, yeah, it's really from what perspective. In terms of how they treat employees, for example, that would be one perspective, but also in terms of what they do for a business.
In terms of creating wealth, creating more jobs, creating more employment.
Well, I mean, that's also a difficult question, because sometimes the obvious answer to that question would be that it must be the big entrepreneurs, right? The big companies, because they create the most jobs. So all of those global conglomerates, the big companies, that would be those that create the most jobs. And like in terms of wealth, economic wealth, then I guess the big fortune companies are the ones that create most wealth. But I think that sometimes we are probably too focused on the big names that we see everywhere, because most people still don't work at these companies, even if they're that huge. But most people don't work at these companies. And so I think that every entrepreneur and every business owner and every employer creates wealth, because they actually, if they employ people, they create jobs. If they don't employ people, they create at least a job for themselves, which is a good thing as well. So I think in that sense, everyone who starts a business contributes to creating that wealth as an entrepreneur. Of course, everyone who is working also contributes to that wealth. So it's a big issue.
So resources management becomes the main thing, the main factor when it comes to your subject. So how do you relate that with work and employment?
Human resource management.
Any resource management.
Yeah, any resource management. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I think that so far it's still safe to say that the human resource is the most important resource. There are people arguing that the human resource is kind of being made redundant at the moment because of all the innovations and AI and all of these technological solutions for things. But I think it will take a very long time until the human being as a resource for creating wealth will be irrelevant. I don't really see that in front of me, really. So I think in that respect, human resources is definitely the most important part, which unfortunately also often is undervalued as an important part of the company. So oftentimes the focus is on creating the economic wealth in the company and handling resources that in a way that are economically beneficial, and the humans are part of that. But in the end, I think the human resource is really the one that we need to care most about, because we're responsible for ourselves. No one else will take responsibility for humanity, and so if you want to create human wealth in like wealth in life style in society that goes beyond the economic wealth, then it's definitely the humans that we have to focus on. In terms of other resources, there is of course the whole environmental debate as well, sustainability, and how do we manage resources in that way, and that's of course a whole different complex issue. But here I think as well there's a lot of great research going on into how we can be more sustainable and how we can save the environment, and so I think that companies that engage actively in that, both in research and in doing it, that's of course really great and really really necessary as well, because it's also intrinsically linked to humanity, right, and our survival. So yeah.
So your bachelor's degree is about English and literature. So if I ask you to relate that subject with the present subject that you are uh, uh, studying, so how that is helping for you, how that helps for you to make things possible, because you mentioned communication. So tell me about that.
So I think what you learn in literature studies is to understand a narrative and how a narrative is, how it's structured, the intentions behind the narrative, to interpret the narrative, and also, quite importantly, most importantly almost, to put the narrative into a context. So you cannot just take a narrative, any narrative, a book, and a story, or a text even just. It doesn't matter if it's a poem or if it's a political piece of paper, but you cannot take it and understand it without taking the context into consideration in which that written piece was written. And so I think that that as well is basically very sociological, right? So we always create our reality within a certain given context, and so what we make of that is very dependent on our surrounding at any given point in time. And so I think the analysis of narratives and also reading between the lines, understanding what people want to convey, communicate, and also that every perspective, every opinion has a right to exist and has a reasoning behind their opinion. I think that's also something that really is part of literature studies, that for every perspective, there's a reason for why this perspective exists. So your perspective on the world, there's a reason for why you have that perspective. And that doesn't make it right or wrong. That's just you have a certain point of reference for your narrative, and I have a point of reference for my narrative. And that is extremely important to consider in literature. And that is important to consider to understand anything that happens in the world, and that's also relevant for my research and for sociology. So when I look at the platform in gig economy and the development of that nowadays, then I need to put that in a context. I need to understand where is it happening, why is it happening, who is making it happen, who is the recipient of that, what kind of consequences does it have in remote parts of the world. I need to understand where work has come from, the concept of work, to understand what work is today. So, and also, I think quite practically, it's about what are people telling us. So if I ask gig workers what they're doing, what they tell me is a narrative. And as an interviewer, and you know that very well, as an interviewer, the challenge is to find out what's the reasoning behind their narrative. And so why have they approached at the conclusions that they talk about? And I think all of that is really hidden in the literature studies as well. It's not always expressed explicitly, but I think that's really where the connection is, to understand why people say what they say and in what kind of context they do that, and to understand the whole picture.
So the market value of the product or things that the companies, the manufacturing companies uh, are developing or creating varies according to the situation, time, and nature, climate, everything, right? So the employment depends on the products that companies are developing or creating or manufacturing. So, what do you understood in your research studies when it comes to this? Which product actually creates which product that you think is very important and necessary for mankind in order to have the permanent jobs, permanent employment, have to be happy with their families all the life.
Yeah. Oh, that's such difficult questions. I'm not sure whether I'm kind of the right person to ask that question. I don't know. I don't really know if that would be for economists to answer, but I mean, in a way, it's again about numbers, right? I mean, in a way, it's on the one hand, you could say that if a company produces products that are not services but products, then it depends on how many people would be involved in the production of these products to actually have jobs. On the other hand, you have service companies that provide services, and depending on what kind of service that is, that could also generate a lot of jobs. So I think it really depends on. In a way, you can say that the more you create products that, whether it's products or services that really everyone needs or wants, the more jobs you create. But on the other hand, I think that's not always a positive thing. So, I mean, you create jobs, but you also create, I don't know, dependencies, or I don't know how to put that. But let's just, okay, so let's take, for example, the mobile phone business as an example. We have created this need. We feel that we need to have a mobile phone. So the market for mobile phones is huge. So that means that, of course, these businesses also create a lot of workplaces, right? And with that, we have developed apps, and now we need to have app developers and IT and software engineers and people who can code apps and do stuff like that. And of course, we have increased the number of people working in these fields. But at the same time, of course, creating these needs reduces work in other companies. I mean, it's like, companies die and companies develop. So it's like an equilibrium. And one of the problems, of course, and this is very philosophical and very deep, really, is that the more we overpopulate Earth, the more jobs we would need to give everyone a job. So we need to create more and more products or services for these people to all have a job. And at some point, that system probably won't work anymore. I mean, we're already having troubles with getting rid of all our trash and of all the mobile phones that we don't use anymore. And so producing more of something and thereby creating jobs is probably not the solution in the long run for humanity to have a good life. So I think the question is a little bit in what kind of time perspective you look at this. And so, yeah, I think I can't answer that better. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just asked you because that is interconnected with what you are studying. So I understood. I understood what you are trying to say. The consumption of energy by human being is more than the production or the creation, right?
Yeah.
If the population increases, we need to create more number of jobs and more wealth in order to balance, in order to give job employment work for every being.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in the long run, I think that's a problem. And we have already increased our number of occupations and jobs like manifold compared to a few hundred years back. And I mean, probably we're going to invent even more. But in the end, there will probably be more and more people that don't have jobs. But I mean, that's just guessing. I don't know. If I'm not the type of economist that would probably be able to actually calculate that statistically for you. So I might be completely wrong. I don't know. But I mean, it's also, we live longer and longer. So I mean, before, if you had two shoemakers in a village, then the supply of shoemakers was kind of in line with how many shoemakers died. But nowadays we live longer and longer, and so we need to have more jobs for more people for longer time. I mean, really, these are huge challenges, of course.
So you study only about the work and employment in the perspective of employee or the students or the people who completed the education, or you understand this in the perspective, the entrepreneur's perspective.
Yeah, I try to do both. I think it's important to have this balance to understand both the employee perspective, but to also understand the employer perspective. Because, I mean, I think both of these perspectives are, of course, extremely important because they need each other. Employees need employers and employers need employees. And so we need to understand both of these sides. And I think sometimes there's a tendency, often also for political reasons, I guess, that that the debate wants to be about one of these sides. And oftentimes it's about the employees. And I mean, one of the reasons is also because the employees are the majority, right? It's not the employers that are the majority. But at the same time, we are incredibly dependent on the employers. And so we need to look at them as well. And we need to understand what makes them tick. We need to understand what kind of problems they have. If we understand what problems they have with managing a good workplace, then we can maybe help them through regulations or whatever. So, I mean, it's not like employers always are the bad guys. I think we need to help them also to be the good guys, but we need to understand what they need to do that. And so my research is on both sides.
So tell me how this collaboration, the connectivity uh, uh, between industries uh, helps constructively to create more wealth with the constructive thoughts. Collaboration, connectivity, relationship, like you said, it's communication, English literature actually helps you to uh, 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 connect, the have a good relationships. So this is very important when it comes to the connectivity between industries, and while in order to create more companies, the product based companies, and to give a lot of jobs to a lot of needies.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the interconnectivity is important not only to create jobs, but also to, well, in the big sense, to understand the world a bit better, but also to, I think that's really where the synergies happen, you know. I think that if two entrepreneurs get together that come from profoundly different areas and they decide to do something together, then what happens is that they can use both of their knowledges and bake them into a grand big project that is fueled by more than just this one idea. And that can open up new perspectives, and that can open up new inventions and innovations. And I mean, I think that's what we see all the time, right? I mean, I think in the end, all innovation comes from that perspective, that people start to open up and widen their perspective, and that's how they get ideas. Um, and so I think that if you want to take innovation as a proxy for more wealth or more workplaces, then I think that's exactly what is needed, and what's going to help us, because companies and entrepreneurs that just stick to what they know and they repeat doing that, like I said before, even with our jobs, that's not cutting it anymore. I mean, developments go so fast, and I mean, I think that there are so many people on earth doing such amazing things, that and we're so global, we're so interconnected now that we get to know also what all of the people all over the world are doing. So we need to keep up. And I think in order to keep up, we need to work together. And I think that in a way, the pandemic, I think, showed that a little bit, what kind of capacity humanity has. If we want to, then different teams of researchers can develop a vaccine in a rather short period of time. And I think that if we would do more of that, working together and really also globally, I think generally humanity would probably I have a problem of always only speaking about economic wealth. I think we would be wealthier in many respects. It would probably just increase our our spiritual wealth in a way, working together, creating synergies, not doing things on our own. And I mean, of course, that's one of the problems as well, that a lot of people want to keep their great inventions for themselves, and they want to have a breakthrough, and it's like company secrets and stuff like that involved as well. So it's not like a completely free world where we can just invent whatever we want. But yeah, I mean, definitely synergies are extremely important. We need to combine all our knowledge to solve the problems that come our way, and also to, I mean, all the kind of invention is a problem solving, right? So that is definitely needed. I think it's not enough to have one person solving one problem anymore. The problems have become too complex as well. I mean, if it was about creating, let's stick to the shoes, a shoe before, I mean, that could be solved in 5 different ways. But nowadays we have such complex problems that I think it needs a lot of more brain power to solve them as well.
So you're a multi-job holder. You're not only doing research. You're not only doing research, trying to understand what works to make things possible. You're also a lecturer. You're trying to understand the perspectives of students, and you're educating them. You're telling them what works and what they should know before coming out. So what their perspectives you understood? What are their futuristic thoughts?
Futuristic thoughts.
Yeah,
The students' thoughts on the future, basically.
exactly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to take that with me into my into my lectures next week, because I think one thing that happened during the pandemic with all the online teaching was that I lost touch with the students in a way. So all of these conversations after class, they don't happen anymore, because you just push the button and then everyone is gone on the Zoom call. And so I feel like I've been extremely out of touch in the past 2 years with the students. So I don't really know what they think about the future right now. And I think many of the things have changed during that time. So my students are predominantly students that study to become HR professionals, human resource professionals. And before the pandemic, their future job idea was, of course, to be a human resource professional, to work in a company and to work with the human resources and both management and development. And that kind of job, and also what you think about it, has probably shifted quite a lot, because now we need to think about how do we want working life to look like in the future. So suddenly we have all experienced working from home. We have realized that for many people increases work-life balance. We're less stressed. We have more time to ourselves for leisure time. And I think right now this discussion is happening in Sweden. How will working life look like again? Are we going to work at a distance, or do we have to come back to the office and work in the office? And of course, for HR professionals, that is a huge question, because their jobs will look completely different if people work from home most of the time than if they are at the office. And so I can't really say what the students' perspective is on that at the moment, but I have my first face-to-face teaching again next week, so I will definitely ask that question to my students. But I think what my intention is to communicate to them that they need to be ready to tackle a completely different working life than they thought that they would have. And one of the big issues here, for example, is the question of work environment and also equipment. So if companies actually allow their employees to work from home, then there are certain regulations and laws in Sweden concerning the work environment that have to be dealt with. Someone has to be responsible. If I get a back pain because I'm sitting on a bad chair at home, is that the employer's responsibility or is it not? In the office, it would be the employer's responsibility. But at home, No one knows. And all of that will be a big part of human resource managers in the future, and or could be, depending on what kind of decisions are being taken. And also, first, these decisions have to be taken, right? So I guess that until my students actually work in that area, some more decisions have been taken. But right now, it's this huge question of how should we deal with this when we get back to work. And so I think they might actually be forced to think a bit differently about that profession of HR.
So how you are managing this zoom out and zoom in jobs, zooming out and trying to understand the societal perspective and seeing from the research, trying to look at the, the entire place, the entire scenario, how the works has been generated, how the employees or employment is being created or happening. This is a zoom out. You have to come out and look at the other person of you should do this job, and half of other perspective, other person in you are is doing, trying to give education, trying to motivate people, trying to motivate students, and trying to make them understand what exactly is working outside outside the world. So how you're managing two different jobs, the research person in you and the educator in you. This is very tough for you to do. I know you have 24 hours like every other human being. So it's how you are able to manage these two different jobs for the development and for the beneficial for the beneficiary of your country and for your state, for the university where you're working.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's a demanding job. That's true. I think the secret is probably that once you understand that they are connected, it's not so difficult anymore, because a lot of my teaching is, of course, based on both my own but also others' research, because that's what we know about the world. And in turn, the students' questions and the students' worries and the students' challenges also have an impact on my own and others' research. And so I think there's actually kind of a very good feedback loop going back and forth. At least for me, that's the ideal way of teaching, to not only stick to textbooks that from, I don't know, 1993, that talk about human resource management. So what I try to do is to include my own and others' research actively into the lecturing, and to kind of keep the lecturing up to date. And yeah, so I think it's necessary, especially in my area, to see that the people I'm educating right now, the people I'm giving this lecture to today, will be the people that will be out there in a year or two, working and contributing on the labor market. And so, yeah, it's really, yeah, it's in a way trying to prepare them, of course, for that job. And so for me, it's not two completely different things. For me, it's like, it's a unit. They belong together, the teaching and the researching. So in that sense, I don't feel that it is such a huge challenge, but it's a lot of work. So that's true. It's like my 24 hours are used quite well.
Amazing. So there'll be a lot of different professionals, not only people who are into sociology, the people from IT industry, uh, from environmental science, from film industry, from authors of different books, police officer, army officers from different parts of this planet will be listening and watching our conversation. So, so what do you say? Because you understand multicultural, you understand the communication, how the relationship, uh, how uh, how to maintain the relationship between people, companies, countries in order to create wealth, products, and give more employment to more employees. So, what do you say to the entire world, especially if one ruler of a country or of Sweden or of India watches this conversation? What exactly that you want to tell as a research student that will work, that will create impact, that will make that person to think and help him to take a decision which makes uh, which creates wealth and which creates jobs with his thought? You have to tell that.
Um, yeah. Um, so what I'm not going to say is, well, the person has to think about to first do this and then do that, and third thing is to buy some of that because that will make everything good. I think um, it's really about understanding the world, basically, or at least the context that you're operating in. So I think that what you need to do, or what would definitely be favorable to do, is to be curious, to be open-minded, and to understand that context matters. Um, because that's kind of one way to understand the world. And if you are too narrow-minded, and if you don't care about other people, if you don't care about the context, if you don't want to understand what situation people are in, if you don't understand where the problems these people have come from, then you won't find a solution to these problems either. So I think a lot of the times we try to solve symptoms, but we don't try to solve the problem. And I think oftentimes that's also because we're not interested in really solving the problem that is behind the symptoms. So I think that one needs to be willing to see others' perspective, because without that, it will be very difficult to create any kind of wealth, whether economic or otherwise. So I think we should all be a bit more willing to see the other's perspective, and to not be judgmental about it, but just see it as what it is. You have your point of reference, you have your point of view because of the context you're in. I have mine, and let's be open about where are our strengths and where are our weaknesses, and where can we combine our strengths and maybe reduce our weaknesses. I think that kind of mindset um, is is probably a mindset that will help you um, achieve great things much more than if you just see your small tunnel and do your own thing. I think be open and yeah. Very
So,
philosophical, I guess.
so at last, what do you say about my questioning in this conversation?
I think you're extremely skilled at asking very hard questions, very relevant questions, and I'm quite amazed by how you're able to kind of dig into such different topics. I mean, you have your background, and I mean, let's face it, we all our backgrounds are limited, right? I mean, we don't know everything, and so I think I'm actually very impressed by your interviewing skill and by the depth that you have in your questions. So you seem to be much more informed about these topics than I guessed that you are.
So, have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube? What do you say about
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I think I really think they're really great. I think that's really it's such a cool way to know things about the world. I think there's so amazing people out there that are worth hearing and seeing, and I think it's great that you give them a voice. And I'm really impressed by your work. I mean, those are a lot of videos, great videos.
So, I will. I'm sure with your vocabulary, with your understanding about work and employment, and uh, about the way you came out studying uh, English literacy, and now you're doing research. Now you're educating students for the welfare of your country, of your place. Now my people also, my country people, my not only Indians, also US people, from other country people also. If your contribution, your words will make create a positive vibes in them, make them think what you're doing, what you said, what have to be changed. The rulers, and at the same time people who are learning, who are not into ruling. So you told for two people, so I'm sure your contribution in coming days is going to affect more people um, on the planet, and I'm sure because of your work, because of your mental, physical energy, uh, not only your university should feel very proud to have you having so much passion and understanding, and doing research and giving lecturers to the students. So I hope you do what you're doing, continue doing what you're doing. So thank you again for giving me your valuable time.
Well, thank you so much for your very kind words. And I can just give them right back to you as well. I think that what you contribute to this world is amazing as well, and your energy and your passion for what you're doing. So I think in that we're united, and let's just make this world a better place, right?
Yeah, anytime you want to say anything through my medium, you're always welcome, because
Thanks.
your words will help people and countries for the development, may create more energy. Your study is not only helpful for a particular organization, for a particular person. I want your contribution to uh, 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 go more far and reach more people, and create more positive energy.
Yeah, thanks. That's really great. I feel very honored. Thank you so much.
Can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Yeah, sure, of course.
And also, can I put this audio and video clip on my podcast website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Yes, you can do that. I would be very happy if you wanted to add my Instagram handle. But yes, of course, you can all do that.
Yeah, I'll put. If you send your links, I'll put in the description. People who find the video on YouTube can see
Yeah.
your social media and can see the work that you're doing. Do you have website, personal website?
Yeah, I have a website too. Yeah.
I will put in the
Thanks.
description so they can see what you're doing.
Thanks. That's really great.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda, for giving me your time again.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for this. It was really nice meeting you. And who knows? Maybe it will be in real life at some point. You never
Yes.
know.
Yes.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.